56 or 57.
Mm-hmm. And some, what was his name, Sohn? That went through the ice at
Oh, on
Lake?
New Year's Day, or New Year's Eve, they went through the ice, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
And there was,
5 people drowned.
On Houghton Lake or Higgins?
Houghton. And we went out to cover that, and
Now, who's we?
well, my brother-in-law Pete Aldrich went out with me, and we went to Mara Lake and got the Jeep from Mara Lake, and so we could drive out on the ice.
Your own personal Jeep? Or his?
Well, Mara Lake's personal Jeep, actually, that belonged to the owners of Mara Lake.
Oh, okay.
I thought you went with Ray Kinkilla.
Well, I'm just getting to that part, but Ray had actually, he was a deputy sheriff, and he had parked on the far side of the lake and then went out on the lake somehow. I don't know just how I got out there, but Pete and I came in from the east side of the lake and drove out, and we got ready to leave and to go get some lunch, actually, and Ray Kinkella said, how about giving me a ride back over to the other side? So we said, sure, get in the Jeep, and we went and followed some other tracks, trying to stay away from that crack that was in the ice where the cars had went through. And as we went, followed the other car tracks or vehicle tracks of some kind, the front end of the Jeep went down and bounced up, and then the rear end of the Jeep went down and bounced up when it went over that crack.
Oh.
And Ray Kinkella was sitting in the back of the Jeep, and it had the framework on it for a top, but it didn't have a top on it. And as the wheels went out of that hole on the second time, he had a hold of that framework, and he was on the side and ready to jump.
Yeah.
But we took him over there and then drove back around, and I guess we got something to eat and went on and took pictures.
So you did some recording, sounds like.
Well, you did everything.
Well, yeah.
You'd my stories at that time would have been a case of not writing them down, but setting them right on the linotype as I set the story.
Oh, okay. So you did some writing.
Just short stories and whatnot, or news articles, not stories, really. And ran the linotype. Daryl and I were the 2 linotype operators, and when you could get up to setting a galley of type in an hour, why, you were pretty good by then. And we could both, after a while, I could do that too, but except tax sales, because you have the minutes, seconds, degrees, and all that, and you had the tax sale setting over here and typing here, and get a stiff neck, and and the minutes, the seconds, the degrees, and something else, you had to pick out of a separate tray and put in every time. You couldn't just, because that wasn't normally on a linotype keyboard.
Wow, that had to be painstaking.
Yeah, and then they would come back, and once you set that linotype, it would come back and go back in that place where you got it, and you'd have to pick it out again the next time, and
You don't miss that, do you?
Not really. I sort of missed the linotype, although I think the last one, I'm sure the Houghton Lake Resorter has one, but the last one that our printing company had probably got burnt in the fire at Sandish, because that was the area where the linotype was. So they still used it a lot, and setting ballots sometimes. So I don't know what all. I can remember on the old hand-fed Kluge, when they had Miss Roscommon contests, we had, what was it, 4-inch type, I think, of wood blocks of type, and we'd have Miss Roscommon 59 or whatnot, or Miss Roscommon alternate or something on it. And it was a 3-person job, because there were two people each holding an end of a big wide strip of ribbon that you're going to print on.
Oh.
And one holding each end and the other guy running the press to, and you wouldn't start it to run it. You'd had a big flywheel on the side. You'd turn it by hand, because trying to hold that ribbon in the right place to get it to print, and that was a very tedious job. You'd have to print 2 or 3 ribbons, so of each one, so if one got dirty or something, you didn't have to run back to the office late at night and print it and do it all over again.
Well, what are some of your, let's go to, you raised all your children here,
Right.
because you've lived here all this time. So tell me a little bit about your children. Either of you or both of you.
Well, Keith's the oldest, and he lives in Roscommon. He works for Martin Chilby, tree trimming. And Patty's the next one, and she lives in Roscommon.
She's an RN.
And she's, I guess, what would you call it, in charge of the emergency room?
The clinical supervisors for
Uh,
the
Yeah,
ER.
And Grayling Mercy.
and Grayling Mercy. And then Doug is the third one, and he's in quality control out at Lear. And then Amanda lives in Indiana, and she and her husband raises dogs, and I don't know, her husband's going into another business of some kind, and I'm not too sure about what that is. Then Mary is a reporter in Jackson, Michigan. She's been a editor at Janesville, Wisconsin, a reporter in Haverhill, Massachusetts, the editor and reporter first, then editor at the West Branch paper, and then a reporter at the Roscommon paper. So she's been into the newspaper for a while.
She followed in your
Yeah.
father's footsteps.
And then Vern is manager of Marquette Mountain Ski Hill.
Oh, so you have a UP connection, huh?
Yeah. And before that, he was the manager of Historyland in Wisconsin. Then who?
And Telmark.
Yeah, it worked at Tilmark. There's a ski area over there. And then Dave, he lives in Roscommon. He's a builder. and Nick has Video Plus in town.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's 8, I guess.
So it's quite a family you raised. Did they all graduate from Roscommon High
Mhm.
School?
Yep.
Great. I didn't realize you had that many children. How many grandchildren do you have?
Well, we have 8. I keep forgetting. We've got 6 grandsons and 2 granddaughters.
Oh, how nice.
But then Dave remarried in January, and his wife has had 3 children. So we picked up
You have some
3 more
step-grandchildren.
step-grandchildren.
Well, that's
2 more girls and another boy.
Great, great. Well, let's get a little bit of your history, although I did interview your mother. But, tell me what you remember about growing up in Roscommon.
Well, we lived on my grandfather's farm at Houghton Lake, about a mile from the lake shore, and
Which grandfather?
my dad's father.
Your dad's father, okay.
And the farmhouse burned when I was about 11 months old.
Oh.
And so we lived in one of the resort cottages, I think at Robert's Resort, which was on the north shore of Houghton Lake.
Oh, okay.
And then they took my dad went and took the men's shanty and the summer kitchen, because my grandfather had a logging business that
Oh,
went
okay.
from the farm too.
Mhm.
And they put those together, and we lived there. And it was very primitive. The pump was behind where the original house was, and this was down farther on the property, so all the water had to be carried by hand. And of course, there wasn't any electricity, but there wasn't much out in Markey at that time anyway. You know, it was, everybody lived that way. In 1937, we moved to Marl Lake, and
When were you born?
1932.
Okay, so you were 5 years old.
And so we lived there. At that time, Marl Lake was owned by, I think, 4 or 5 families. And in 19...
Were they local families that
No,
were living there?
no, they were all from the Detroit area.
downstate, okay.
In 41 or 42, one of the people that belonged to the group bought the other ones out. And his name was William Stadler, and he owned it, and then until his youngest son, Jim, sold it to the DNR.
Oh.
So, and again, it was very primitive there, because we did have a pump in the kitchen, but there wasn't any electricity or anything like that until 1945.
Do you remember that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So what kind of dwelling did you have? Was it?
it was cedar posts that were set on horizontally instead of vertically,
Oh.
and it was plastered in between those.
Mm-hmm.
And beautiful wood floors, very narrow strips of I would assume it was maple. It was very nice floors.
Hmm.
And we had a screen porch. In fact, both houses had a screen porch that went across the front, and between the two houses was a tool shed that set back a little ways, and there was an ice house, and then there was a 3-car garage with
Horse stalls.
stables for a couple of horses,
Oh.
and then behind that was room for cows.
Wow, so it was quite a little settlement there.
Mm-hmm. And we had, during the Second World War, we had pigs. We had 2 that they raised until they were huge.
Oh, really?
And then they they had 5 in a pen up to the towards the north end, and they raised those until they were about probably 300 pounds
Wow.
each.
Wow.
And
Was that for the family to use then when they were slaughtered?
Well,
or did you sell that?
it was a combination deal. My dad had a friend that ran what do they call it? Where you go in and rent horses to ride.
The stable?
Like a stable on Belle Isle.
Oh.
And so they went together and got these pigs because he had a crew of men that worked for him that took care of the horses and cleaned the stable and stuff like that. And it was very hard to get meat for people
Oh. Okay.
during the Second World War. You had to have ration cards, and so he took the first one of these big white pigs, and then we kept the next one until the following winter. So it was even bigger.
Enormous, huh?
Mm-hmm. And we had a horse.
So then did your family slaughter it and use that meat then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, we ground the.
Did you go to a country school
No.
from there then, or where did you go to
No,
school?
that we were bused into the Roscommon school.
Were you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because by that time it was late 30s. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't start going to school until I was 6, because my mother wanted me to be there with my brother, and then there was a gap. In fact, and I didn't go to kindergarten. I just went right into first grade.
Oh.
And when he started school, he went to kindergarten, and then
Which brother was this?
I only have one,
Oh,
Pete.
just Pete's the only boy?
Mhm.
Okay.
So,
So you were sent off together, the two of you?
so and then of course I lived there until I married Paul, and my mother lived there until 1963.
Did you graduate from high school?
What was it? 49?
Yeah, you would have been 17 and 14.
Yeah, 17, and I didn't graduate until I was 42 or 43. I went back to school. I only had to
did you?
have 2 credits to graduate,
Oh,
so I went back to
52 you mean? You were born in 32, so
Uh-huh.
you would have been 17 and 49. And you
I
didn't
would've-
graduate then?
No, I would have graduated in 1950, but I went back in 1970 something, I don't remember what.
70s. Oh, okay.
And drove to Grayling nights a week for a whole year.
Oh, bless your heart.
Yeah. Oh.
Good for you. Well, what can you tell us about growing up in Roscommon? What did you do for entertainment?
Well, we had canoes, we had a boat with a motor, and there's only a little narrow stretch between Marl Lake and Higgins Lake, and we went swimming every day, and sometimes 2 or 3 times a day.
Wonderful.
We didn't we didn't get to do that as much as we would have liked to, because once polio started really going around, my dad would not let us go to the beach by ourselves. He would take us after he got home from work, and we could swim, and we didn't associate with anybody else or anything. We just went and swam, and that was it. But
Yeah, we've forgotten about the polio scare and how
yeah,
we have to be careful.
and of course we had
Were you all good swimmers?
no.
No?
I'm not. We had Carricks lived about less than a half a mile from where we lived, and there were the 2 boys were older, Keith and Virgil, but Thelma and Doris and Phyllis and Shirley Shirley was my age, and the other girls were older, but it was all a group that did things together, and
Did they live on the lake? On Higgins
no,
Lake? Or
no, they lived next to the
the
store in the wintertime, and in the summer they lived, do you know where Barry's Boatyard is? Or was not Barry's, it's, was it Higgins Lake Boatyard?
No.
Yeah.
Up around a little bit on the west
Mhm.
shore.
Yeah.
There was a house there that they lived in the summer, and then the store, or the house they lived in next to the store, was used for, I think one of Lynn's brothers had a tavern there once, one summer.
Really?
They-
I've not heard of a tavern at
They've,
that spot before.
they had a different businesses in there during the summer.
So they would move out,
Mm-hmm,
they'd live there in the winter.
mm-hmm,
In the summer, it was more profitable to use it for a business, huh?
mm-hmm.
Did you tell her where you
Clever.
were born at?
No.
Are you going to tell Paul?
Limberlost Bar and Tavern.
Oh, my gosh.
It was a hotel at the time.
Uh-huh, for
And
heaven's
a
sake.
doctor came up here that suffered from asthma, and he bought the place, and in 1930 to 37, he operated it as a hospital.
Oh, wonderful. And you were born there, huh?
Mhm.
For heaven's sake.
The only one of my mother's 4 children that was born in a hospital. The others were born at home.
Mhm.
So
Well, you're privileged.
I'm privileged.
You're
yeah.
special.
Yeah.
Well, that's nice. Do you remember what do you remember about the hotels on Higgins Lake? Were there any still there when you were
Hotel
young?
Burdell was in business. Carpenters had one just down the street from where my mother's house is now.
Mhm.
There was
Did any of you work there or anything?
I worked at Carpenter's for one day.
Oh.
Waiting table and cleaning up, washing dishes and
Uh-huh.
and clearing tables and stuff. And that was it.
By your choice?
By my choice.
Uh-huh. One day was enough, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember a hotel called the Cole Hotel, C-O-L-E?
No.
No? The only person that remembers about that was Norma Lefebvre-Coggins. She
Oh.
talked about that. She said she and her sisters worked there when they were young, but see, she's a lot older than you. I mean, she
Yeah,
She was.
that's,
was earlier than what you would have been.
yeah, that's Lorraine's
Lorraine's mother.
mother.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Now there was,
So what was the boating like? You said you had a canoe
we had
on
canoes.
Higgins Lake.
That was
that
on,
you would use.
on Marrow Lake.
You would take it to Higgins though, to go
No,
swimming or no?
no.
Just in Marrow
We
Lake?
could take it over to the cut, and
Oh, okay.
the cut was hard bottomed, and we could swim in there. So we had a special little place where we'd go in, and we could leave our boat right there because the reeds grew up close on either side,
Oh.
and then we could get out and walk up to where there was a curve in the river, and it was deep there, so we could swim in there.
Oh.
And we walked every
Now,
place.
was that on the part of the river between Marrow and Higgins, or was
Mhm,
it
between
down the
Marrow
other
and
way? Between
Higgins.
Marrow and Higgins.
I made one trip with my dad and my aunt and a friend of my aunt's. My aunt lived in Chicago, and her friend, of course, was from there. And my dad took us from Marrow Lake to Houghton Lake. And that was really different.
How old were you? Were you like
Uh,
a teenager when you did that, or?
I think I was probably 12 or 13.
So was that in canoe, so you had two canoes?
No,
That
we
was-
went in a boat,
Oh.
and it had a front, like a deck that was covered in, and then there was a seat, and there was a seat in the middle and a seat in the back. And I think we had enough food packed for like 3
Could've stayed
days.
2 weeks, huh?
Yeah. And we got down to what was called the High Banks then. And we stopped there and had lunch. And then it was between the High Banks and the Cut River Bridge that we came. Well, the first thing that happened was this lady that was with us, my aunt's friend, was a great big woman. She was tall and she was heavy set. And she, for some reason, she wanted to be standing up all the time. And my dad said, you'd better sit down because there's a tree hanging out over the water up here. She either didn't listen or she didn't want to take his advice, but anyway, the tree hit her and back she went, and of course her bottom hit on the seat, but then her head went back, and I'm surprised it didn't knock her out because it just like that. And we left from there, and we got to another place where there was a log partway across the water. So my dad said that that my aunt and I would have to get out, and he would go on one side, and this other lady would go at the back, or just the opposite, I can't remember which it was. But anyway, they would lift the boat over the log, and because there wasn't enough room to get it past, and then everybody would get back in and we'd be on our way. So this happened to be where there was a really deep hole, and neither my aunt nor I were keen about standing on this wiggly log, but we did it. And it was an interesting trip, but we started fairly early in the morning, and we didn't get down to Houghton Lake until, it must have been 6:30 or so in the evening. And I'd really like to try that again, but I don't know. But it it was fun, and there was lots of kids that lived out in that area, and we did what most kids did. We went trick-or-treating on Halloween, and we took advantage of the fact that we had the beautiful lake to swim in, and we could go over to the park in the summertime, and you'd meet kids there that were up camping,
Sure.
and we could always have kids out to stay overnight. Don't know how they appreciated the primitive conditions, but they lived through it, so I guess it was all right.
Well, your mother was such a good cook. They probably were having a great time. Did you go to the music box? Was that a popular thing when you were a teenager?
It was a popular thing, but I never was allowed to go there.
Oh, okay.
About the time that, well, before my youngest sister was born, and she's 14 years younger than I am, my mother got very involved in church things, and
Dancing was not on the menu.
dancing was not on the menu. There wasn't much on the menu. We couldn't go to the show, we couldn't dance. She'd get really irate at us because we had the radio, of course, and we listened to that a lot, and there was all these cutesy little commercials for Rinso White and Ajax, the foaming cleanser, and we'd not only sing the pop music, but we'd sing all these little commercials, and not,
She didn't appreciate that, huh?
no.
Was your father the stricter of for the discipline, or your mother?
Well, when my dad said no, you knew that it was final. And so you didn't get in any hassles with him. Not too much. I did when I was older, but when I was younger, what he said went. And with my mother, as I got a little older, I pretty much did what I pleased, because she actually, she was more concerned of what kind of trouble my brother was getting into.
He was a good decoy for you, huh? Well, as you were bringing your children up here in Roscommon, what are some of your memories? As early newlyweds and early parents.
Well, the three oldest were like the Three Musketeers. They would go out and play, and they'd talk sometimes to each other, like, I'm the boss or something like that. But they got along really, really well. And
You lived in this house shortly after you were first married then?
The original part that we bought was 20 by 24, that part right in there.
Where I see the logs in the ceiling?
Mhm.
Yeah. And then we added down there, and then here, and back there.
Nice, just nice.
I said that I was like Cardinal Richelieu, and the Three Musketeers were going to do me in one way or the other. They got up on the roof one time, and I heard this noise, and I rushed out, and of course Keith and Patty were the older ones, and they came down instantly. But Doug was only about this far from the edge, and he had got his jacket caught in the shingles, and he couldn't get loose. So I came in, and I was fortunate too. I was like Mrs. Birtle. I called the office and have Paul come home. And as soon as Doug saw the car coming, he did a monstrous yank and got his jacket loose and came down safely. But I don't remember if Paul gave him a spanking or not, but
The one I remember was,
the dog.
yeah, Amanda calling me at work, and she was so excited that Pat had went out by the dog, which was tied up on a chain, and the chain had got around her leg, and then the dog lunged, and Amanda's trying to tell me this, and I was listening to her, and I thought she'd said the dog had broke its leg.
Oh, but it was
Yeah.
Mom.
Well, she didn't break it, but she really hurt it bad. And I said, well, I'll come home and shoot it then.
Oh, gee.
And hung up. I guess Mandy was about.
Poor little cat. Oh, golly.
But I think the kids enjoyed growing up here because they,
You know, I used to play baseball over there before there was all those trees and the building and whatnot.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
How much land do you have here?
We had 5 acres.
Oh.
And then we built that garage and an apartment up above. And Nick moved in, and we ended up splitting, giving him part of the 5 acres. He's got an acre and something.
Oh.
In that place there.
Well, it's nice to have someone close by, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
and the 3 older boys played football. Keith for only a couple years, but Doug played from junior high through high school, and so did Vern, and we enjoyed that. Patty went and talked to Dr. Oppie about having a nurse's aide class at Grayling, and he got it okayed, and so she and Mary Jo Ama and Wendy Weaver and Tom Ama were the kids from Roscommon that went up there, and they had one of the Tobin boys and one of the McWilliams girls from Grayling were all the group that they had the first
Oh.
year or so that they had that. So.
And where was that, at the hospital?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was neat. Then she went on to get her RN and her
Mhm.
bachelor's, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm.
Did she get her master's also?
Not yet.
Patty? No?
I don't think she's going to now. I
Oh.
think she's.
I wouldn't either, I tell you. What do you remember about going to school here? Do you remember some of your teachers?
Well, I had Miss Hines for first grade, Miss McGurk for second grade, who was Dobie Munn's wife eventually.
Oh, okay.
Miss Moon, Harriet Moon for third grade. Marjorie Isaacson for fourth grade. Claire
You have a good memory.
Neighbor for fifth.
Like NABOR?
Fifth grade, and Wilma Brzezowski for sixth grade.
Oh, what good memory you have.
And Earl Haight.
And Earl Hay, when
Can't
you got
forget
to high
Earl
school.
Well, actually, he came to Roscommon as a coach when I was in the fourth grade,
Oh, okay.
and that was my first of many spraining my ankle, and he came and took me in and the classroom, and they got a couple of my classmates to form a chair and haul me down to the doctor's office.
So the high school was still in town. You graduated in town, I imagine.
Mhm.
You went to, well, actually, all your
All my
all your
classes.
school was
Uh-huh.
in that building.
We used to,
How many were in your class?
well, at the end, there was only 25, I think. And there weren't too many more than that when we started. About 25 then, I think, too.
What do you remember of the war years?
Mm. Well, my mother's next to the youngest brother went in the service, and Carrick's younger, well, Keith was in the Army too. Keith was older though, I guess you just kind of expect it for the older guys. But Virgil was younger, and he went in the service, and my uncle did his training out in California, and he was with a anti-aircraft
What was his
battery.
name?
Harold Apps,
Oh, okay.
and I think Virgil did his training in the East. Anyway, they went the opposite directions when they were finally, and my uncle landed in Saint-Lô, France, about 2 or 3 weeks after D-Day.
Oh,
And Virgil was in when they started to retake the Philippines, and he was killed on Leyte Island, and my uncle was killed right before the Battle of the Bulge.
oh my gosh.
So,
Those were sad days.
yeah, very hard, because when my uncle had came home on furlough before he was sent out east, he married Virgil's sister, the oldest
Oh.
one of the Carrick girls.
Oh, okay.
So it was a really rough
Yeah.
time.
For sure.
And he had been killed in October, and we got the news that my uncle had been killed before Carrick's found out. They didn't find out till 2 or 3 days after the telegram had came about my uncle that he had been killed on Leyte in October. So the two things actually hit us very close
At the same-
together.
Yeah, wow.
And he kept a little tiny rowboat down at Mara Lake at our house, and he loved to go out in that and fish. And it was the most skittish little boat, but he'd stand up and cast in that, and just had a lot of fun with that. And my dad had taken an old truck and made it into something he could pull the trailer with to haul wood. And he came down one time and he wrote on it really fancy letters, Leapin' Lena, and all kinds of little little sayings all over the hood of this tractor.
Oh, the tractor he rode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they
Then was he buried here then? Was he brought back here?
I'm not sure. I think so. I'm not sure. I know my uncle was, but I'm not sure about him.
Well, we're coming to the end of our tape. Let's see if there's any other things that you could stand out in your early years here in Roscommon, early newlywed, when you first came here. You worked hard.
It worked.
Mhm.
The the first, 3 years, till we didn't move out here till 53. First 3 years were hectic because soon after we got married, we went down to Pontiac to live, and he worked for Pontiac Motors. And then the following spring, we came back up here. So that was the second move. And he worked at at Higgins Lake Boatyard. Then he got a job with the DNR, and we moved to Midland.
Oh my goodness.
And we stayed there most of that summer. But he had applied at the A&P, so he got a job there. So we moved back up here, and